Friends, welcome to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It's not difficult for you, but it's nice for me, and we're starting. To find out that your whole life for the last 20-odd years has been a complete lie, and all the people important to you either participated in this lie or condoned it or tacitly agreed with it, is a heavy burden, right? So it happened for Andrew Masters. Andy was sitting at his desk in his office, feeling depressed and feeling a little sorry for himself. Quite justifiably, because he had to be in the midst of an unusual, luxurious December and Christmas cruise with his wife, 2 daughters, and his wife's parents. But a week before his departure to the home port, his father-in-law, Marvin Monk, summoned him to a meeting in his luxurious executive office. "Listen, Andy, of course, I understand that you are looking forward to a cruise with your family, but there are some work issues, and I really need you to be in the office throughout December. Of course, without your presence, a family cruise will not be such a family event, but please be sure that I will compensate for this in your bonus. And also, during the next year, I will arrange a special luxury vacation for you, Katie, and the girls, which, of course, the company will fully pay for." Andy didn't agree with Marvin, but for some reason the older man seemed unyielding, and in the evening Andy talked with his wife and daughters over a homemade dinner. "Oh no," Katie said. "Dad knows how important Christmas holidays are for the family. It's just so unfair that you have to skip them. Do you want me to talk to Mom and try to convince her to change her mind?" He shrugged his shoulders. "Well, yes, it will be useful, dear. Thank you." Their twin daughters, Cassandra and Emily, spoke up. "Yes, please, Mom. We can't let Dad miss the family Christmas holidays. It would be wrong." Although Andy considered Cassandra and Emily his daughters, they were barely 2 years old when he met their mother, Katie, a recently divorced single mother. She still spoke well of her ex-husband. Bill was not and is not a bad person. Not quite. It's just that we probably got married too early, and I think we both had completely different aspirations. We became estranged. He went away for 2 years to photograph and paint wildlife in different parts of the world, and we decided that the best option for us would be a divorce. I didn't ask for alimony, but he paid it regularly, so everything was fine. By the time Andy met Katie, he had just received an MBA in Management and Business Communications, and over dinner, in a conversation with Katie's father, Marvin, impressed the latter with his deep knowledge of business, especially in the industry in which Marvin himself worked. By the end of the evening, Andy had arranged a meeting with Marvin the next morning to discuss the possibility of working in the office of his rapidly growing business empire. Andy continued to date Katie and discovered that he loved the twins as if they were his own daughters. After a year of dating, he proposed to Katie. She agreed. They got married, and Andy continued to work for Marvin, eventually taking up the position of Marvin's assistant. He was the perfect employee, the perfect husband, the perfect father to the girls, and the perfect son-in-law to Marvin and Claire. It was he who dealt with the monsters under the girls' beds and the monsters in their closets, taking turns getting up at night and comforting them when they were sick, helped them with their homework, comforted them when their dates didn't go according to plan, etc. He took care to treat the girls as his princesses and their mother as his queen. Katie did not work. She was actively involved in several charities funded by GWS, which was run by her father. She was the real queen of the local social life. 16 years later, he suddenly felt like a dinosaur in one of the cartoons, which depicts dinosaurs with food falling out of their mouths, and they look up in amazement, watching as a 6-mile-wide asteroid known as the Chicxulub asteroid screamed across the sky, ending life as they knew it. It was December. Christmas was a few days away, and he missed his wife and daughters terribly. He grumbled to himself that he had to stay at work while the whole family enjoyed a month-long Caribbean cruise. He didn't know why he had to stay at work, and at home the bed seemed very big and empty, and the house was a hollow echo of silence, for lack of a better expression. His hitherto perfect life was hit by a personal Chicxulub asteroid when Marvin's personal assistant Julia Weston nervously knocked on the door of his office. "Andy, could you give me a minute of your time, please?" "Of course I will, Julia. Please close the door and sit down. You look a little worried. Is there anything I can help you with?" At that moment, Julia began to cry, and then Andy noticed that she came to his office with a pack of napkins, which she used to wipe her eyes. "Thanks, Andy. That's so sweet of you. That's exactly what I expected from a wonderful, resilient guy like you. But I've come to you with a problem that does not concern me, but with information about a problem that concerns you." "Please go on," Andy said. knowing that no matter what she told him, he wouldn't like it. We are talking about that family cruise for December and Christmas, which lasts for a whole month, and from which you were obviously excluded at the last moment. Andy nodded silently. I was helping Marvin book a cruise, but I still didn't understand what was going on with him until he told you that you were excluded at the last minute. Andy, the truth is, there was no reservation for you on this cruise at all. Bill Baxter, your wife's ex-husband, took your place in advance. He is registered with her in the same luxury cabin. I'm sorry that I had to tell you about it. Andy felt completely devastated by this news. He thanked Julia for helping him by providing this information. Why are you telling me this, Julia? And I don't want to sound like a jerk, but don't you have any proof, excuse me? I have emailed you the booking documents. And also, is that why I did it? Because I know what a wonderful person you are. I've seen how much you love Katie and the girls. And I realized that I would never let them do this to you. Letting Katie's ex-husband take your place on this cruise is nothing short of an asshole act on the part of them all. I've worked with Marvin for 25 years. I've known Claire, Katie, and the twins since I graduated from college. And I never thought for a minute that he could be so duplicitous and, for lack of a better word, so damn mean. What are you going to do, Julia? I am leaving GWS immediately for early retirement and moving to Florida to live with my daughter and son-in-law. They're starting their own business, and I'm going to transfer my 401k retirement plan to their newly formed corporation. Since my husband died 10 years ago, I've been getting more and more restless, and since my daughter and Dan often asked me to move in with them, and considering how Marvin messed with you, I thought, if Marvin did this shit to his own son-in-law, then what chance do I have if he decides to do something like that to me? I know what you mean, Julia, I really do. However, please assure me that you will not leave just because of what is happening to me? Julia shook her head. It certainly helped me figure it out, Andy, but no more. They both stood up and he hugged her. Thanks for bringing me up to date. Obviously, my so-called family is up to something bad. I'll keep you posted. We will keep in touch. She left his office, and Andy realized that he had something to think about. After what Julia said, Florida seems like a good option, he thought. A few days later, on Christmas morning, he was sitting alone in the house he shared with Katie and her girls. He realized that his attitude towards them was changing. The house he shared with them is no longer shared, and Cassandra and Emily are no longer his daughters. Cassandra and Emily are now her girls. Isn't that why Katie has always rejected the idea of adoption? Did he ask himself a question? And what he thought was home is now just a building, if anything. Even before he found out that Bill Baxter was replacing him, Andy didn't really like the idea of finding someone to spend Christmas with. But now, after learning that Katie and the girls had gone on a freaking month-long family cruise with her ex-husband, he realized that he didn't want to talk to any of the friends he had made after getting together with Katie and the girls. After all, most of them were Katie's friends first, and only then Andy's friends. So how many of them know that he is Katie's clown or Katie's puppet? No. It's better to stay away from them. He was the only child in the family, and his parents died when he was very young, so he did not have his own family to visit. So that year he decided not to celebrate Christmas at all. He thought about cooking himself something for Christmas dinner. Walmart offers a range of fast-cooking Christmas dishes, from pasta and cheese in Kraft Deluxe, white cheddar easy molds, which can be easily heated in the microwave, to frozen dishes from tender white turkey Stuffer's roast. He realized that if he bought any of these, he would look like the biggest loser in the world, and decided to avoid anything that would somehow remind him of the Christmas meal. And then, on Christmas morning, his phone rang. The screen showed that it was Katie. He decided to answer the phone. "Merry Christmas, Dad." It was Cassandra calling from her mother's phone. "Merry Christmas, Cassandra, and also Emily and Katie," he replied evenly. "Who are you celebrating Christmas with, Dad?" "With no one. In fact, I don't celebrate at all. After all, Christmas is a time for people with families. And since I don't have a family, I decided not to bother." Katie intervened. "Oh, do you feel neglected, dear? I'll fix it when we get back. Besides, Dad says that the company will arrange a good vacation for you, me and the girls next year." "It's a good idea, Katie, it's really a good idea. But how will your man, Bill Baxter, react to this? After all, you will live in the same luxurious cabin with him all the time of the cruise, presumably as husband and wife?" Katie gasped and said, "Who told you that? This is not what it seems. However, this is not the case." "Don't worry, Katie. I have no idea what I've done to make you, your daughters, and your parents treat me like this. Hate me so much, but don't worry. By the time you get back from Christmas break, I'll have left home a long time ago. And please tell your father that he can transfer Bill to my old job since I'm quitting the company." He turned off the phone. There was a panic in the cabin of the ship. "Oh no, Dad," Katie howled. "I've tried so hard all these years to make Andy and Bill separate but equal husbands in my life. How do I fix this now?" Claire, her mother, intervened in the conversation with a sour expression on her face. I warned you, Katie, and you, Marvin, that the idea of separate but equal husbands is stupid and dangerous. But she's been working so well for the last 15 years. If only Andy hadn't found out about it. I wonder who told him." Claire shook her head. "It doesn't matter now." There was desperation in his voice on the phone. "Yes, and why not? As far as he understands, his wife left him for another man, her first love. I hope he doesn't do anything wrong." "Don't say that, Mom. I don't wish him any harm. I love him." "Well, I think Andy almost certainly doesn't feel love from any of us at the moment," Claire said. And she was right. Andy felt unloved, humiliated, insulted, and ridiculed. And all this from those whom he mistakenly considered his family, who he believed loved him as much as he loved them. Andy was always jealous of the British and other Commonwealth countries celebrating Christmas Gifts Day or St. Stephen's Day on December 26th. But now, on the morning of December 26th, he was glad that this day was considered a normal working day in American offices, although sometimes with a touch of regret from a hangover. Early in the morning, he called Cascade, Northern and Wyatt law firm, although the only person he really wanted to talk to was Mary Northern, whom he had known since his student days, because he got quite close to her brother Jake. Thanks to who he was, his call was transferred to Mary's private number with minimal delay. "Hi, Andy. Happy holidays. What can I do for you this morning?" "Happy holidays to you too, Mary. Unfortunately, the call will be businesslike in a way. I need the services of a divorce lawyer." "Oh no, Andy. What did she do to you?" Andy was interested in this answer. "It seems she left me for her first husband, Bill Baxter." "Damn it. Do you have any proof?" "Yes, they're on a family cruise together, so not only is she cheating on me, but her whole fucking family is involved." At that moment, his voice almost broke. "Oh, baby, this is terrible. The whole family, including the girls. Damn. Look, I'll handle this personally for you. Actually, I'll free up the afternoon for you if you don't mind. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon?" He agreed, and shortly before that time, he was escorted to her office. "How do you want it to go, Andy?" "Reconciliation or divorce? I'm leaning towards divorce, Mary. To be honest, I understand why. But what if it's something new that they're on a cruise together?" "Yes, that's a good question. But if she's been playing family with her ex-husband for a month during a 4-week family Christmas cruise with her parents and my adopted daughters, and they all know she's cuckolded me, in my opinion, this is bad enough. But if this is the culmination of infidelity for months or even, God forbid, years, well, there's no getting away from that, is there?" "I wouldn't think so, Andy. No way. Sometimes I offer advice, but this cruise story is so out of the ordinary that I doubt it's possible to recover from it. Unless she has a damn good excuse." Mary gave Andy a small bottle of water, took one for herself, and began making notes on an expensive electronic tablet. Remarkable. "Can you tell me everything that's happened lately, Andy?" He told Mary about the meeting at which Marvin Monk informed him that he was no longer invited on a family cruise, and he had to stay at home and work in the office. But there is no good reason for him to stay in the office. Then he told how Katie had told him she would talk to her mother to get Marvin to change his mind. But now he thinks it was a lie, just to keep him quiet. He stopped talking about how Julia Weston had come to him and informed Andy that he hadn't actually been booked on the cruise, that his place had already been taken by Bill Baxter, his wife's ex-husband and the father of the twins. That's what hurts so much. The girls knew, they should have known the truth, but they lied anyway, allegedly trying to make Marvin change his mind. "Yes." Mary nodded. "It must hurt." He shrugged his shoulders. "Yes, it hurt. Until now, I have always perceived girls as my own daughters, but now I understand that they are just my stepdaughters. Well, actually, it's not even like that. It always bothered me a little that Katie never allowed me to adopt her daughters, always brushed me off, making excuses. Now I understand why. Obviously, she never considered me her real husband or the right father for her damn offspring. Don't do this to yourself, Andy. I know you've been treated badly, but don't let it turn you inside out. I have a list of therapists if you need one. Thanks. I'll keep that in mind. Andy, you should actually hire a private investigator. We always recommend Jenner Investments. Doug Jenner, the company's director, is a former city police inspector. It's not cheap, but it's very good. He nodded in agreement with her suggestion. She sent Andy his contact details. Much less pretentious than giving people business cards, but so modern, she thought. At the end of the meeting, Mary stood up, hugged Andy, and said, "I will prepare the documents to file a lawsuit against her. In our state, people get divorced through fault or no fault. How do you want to get divorced? Through fault or without?" He nodded thoughtfully. "I suppose it's my fault. And also, what do you want to do with your employer?" "What do you mean? What can I do?" "Sue them for constructive termination of the contract. If your employer forced you to skip a family vacation, leaving you to work while your wife, his daughter, was with another man, then the professional relationship between you and him cannot really be preserved, and you can sue for constructive termination of the contract. Do you want me to do it?" "Yes, please. I hadn't thought of that. Thanks for the tip." He went home, packed several suitcases, a sports bag, electronics, and booked an apartment at the Marriott Hotel in the city center. He went there by Uber and was checked in an hour later. It's funny, he thought he might cry, but he seemed numb from everything that was happening. He took another Uber to the GWS office and once in his office asked Julia to meet with him. He told her about the incident and informed her that he was quitting immediately. They hugged and Julia kissed him on the cheek. "You're doing the right thing, Andy. If my husband had done at least half of what your so-called family is doing to you, I would have gladly shot him and got time for it. Although Davis was a good man, he probably wouldn't even think about being an asshole like Katie." He emailed the HR department his resignation letter and arranged for the payment of his last salary and other money due. I handed over the keys to the office and the pass to the personnel department. As part of his award, Andy has always been very attentive. Of course, with the new knowledge, Andy wondered if the size of the package was due to guilt on the part of his former family. He called his broker and immediately liquidated his employer's entire stock portfolio. From $10 million. It was impossible to refuse dollars. He opened a new account at Mercantile and Savers Bank, and when he deposited $10 million into his account, they seemed delighted. Of course, due to the size of the deposit, they would have to notify the authorities, but he had expected this and was not too worried. Then I went back to my room and called Doug Jenner, who had a vacancy at 9:30 a.m. the next day. He ate a light dinner from room service, drank a bottle of IPA, Indian Pale Ale, watched some BBC America documentary, and fell asleep at 10 at night. For some reason, traveling alone and staying in hotels, Andy never managed to stay up late. The next morning, he talked with Doug Jenner in his office, which, although functional, did not attract much attention, being somewhat rustic. There was a display case with various ordinary-looking devices, smartphones, smoke detectors, chargers, electrical outlets, etc. After shaking hands, they sat down at a round table. "All of these devices look ordinary and inconspicuous," Doug said, "but they're actually eavesdropping and listening devices. However, I don't think they will be useful in your case, but who knows? At least at first, my company will use her social media to find out what your wife is doing. Surprisingly, most people who either cheat on their spouse or steal from their employer or business partner are too stupid to realize that they spread information too much to the whole world. I talked to Mary this morning and she thinks very highly of you, so I will be happy to work with you to help you learn what you should learn. But don't make mistakes if you use what I tell you to take revenge on them. I have already seen this, and it never, never ends well for the victim of deception if she is tempted to follow the path of revenge." Before continuing the conversation, he asked an employee to bring coffee and forced Andy to sign a contract. Over a cup of coffee, Doug said, "All I need from you is a photo of your wife, your daughters, their grandparents, and detailed information about her presence on social networks, as well as your social media, and then I'll ask my team to start an investigation." "How long do you think it will take?" Andy asked. "Oh, not too long, I think. Let's count it 48 hours. They said goodbye, and Andy paid his deposit to the prompt and responsive girl at the front desk. The next 2 days passed strangely for Andy. He missed his old way of life, his family, and his job. But he understood that his entire previous life was based on lies, and none of it was real. However, he felt pretty good overall. "I didn't do anything stupid like start smoking or get drunk every night." He even looked at Gideon's Bible, which was in the apartment, although he took only a cursory glance at the accompanying Book of Mormon. After all, the Marriott family is Mormon, he realized, and assumed that they liked to include the sacred texts of their faith along with Gideon's Bible. He was surprised that even before the 48-hour deadline set for him by Doug Jenner, one of his employees called him. "Mr. Masters, Mr. Jenner has obtained some information about your wife's infidelity. Could you visit our office so that he can make a report?" Later in the afternoon, Doug made a report to Andy. "Andy, I must say that your fears and suspicions turned out to be correct. Your wife has been in a long-term affair with William Baxter for the past 15 years. Andy swallowed and sighed. "This news confuses me. On the one hand, of course, I am devastated, but at the same time I feel relieved." Doug nodded. "Yes, I can understand. You felt betrayed, but now you have the information and knowledge to move on." "And how did you find out?" Doug shrugged his shoulders. "Surprisingly simple. Your wife had a Facebook page when she was Mrs. Baxter, but after marrying you, she disabled that page and opened a new one under the name Katie Masters. However, a few years after marrying you, she reactivated her old page under the name of Mrs. Baxter, and it is obvious that from that moment on she had two separate lives, one as Mrs. Masters, the other as Mrs. Baxter. My team was able to use the latest artificial intelligence technologies to conduct deep searches on her and your social networks, including Google Calendar, your employer's websites, your relatives' social networks, etc., and we were able to establish a correspondence between what is happening. Do you remember the moment when your employer started sending you on long business trips, as well as on foreign trips?" Andy shuddered. "Yes, I remember since you're talking about it. It must have been 14 or 15 years ago?" His face darkened with anger. "Were these business trips arranged to give this cheater time to be with Baxter?" Doug nodded sympathetically. "Yes, it seems that it was, at least for some trips. And soon after that, I started receiving large bonuses for my work, as well as huge blocks of shares. I bet it was to appease me, right?" Doug shook his head. "As far as we understood, this was Monk's way of calming his conscience at the insistence of his wife, who was not happy with what they were doing to you." "How did this affair start?" Doug asked. "Obviously, Baxter returned from the hole where he worked, photographed and painted, apologized to Katie, and Katie decided that she would have two lives. She would be married to two men, you and Baxter. And the key role in keeping you busy and not interfering so that Katie could spend time with Baxter was played by her father. Did the twins know about this?" "Yes, they knew. However, they were actually taught and bribed so that they would never tell you or that you would not find out about it by accident. But what I can't understand is why such nonsense about a family vacation. What was that?" Actually, this question is easy to answer. It seems that Billy Baxter has been overcome by wanderlust again. He was assigned to work in Antarctica for the next 4 years as an official photographer and artist. Katie didn't like the idea of being separated from her lover for such a long time, and then she came up with an amazing idea, to invite him to replace you for a month's vacation in order to somehow support her. I think one could say so. Ugh, what the hell? Who does that? Apparently she decided she loved both you and Baxter and devised a scheme to keep you both. Will I be able to use the information you found in my divorce case? Yes, Doug said. It's all in the public domain, so we haven't tapped your wife and her lover. But I wouldn't have the slightest idea how to get that information. I'd be fucked up without you. That's why I'm so passionate about my job, Doug replied. I sent a copy of the report to Mary Northern, and since it turned out to be so easy, I won't have to present you with another bill, so that's it. They shook hands and parted. Katie returned to the empty house. All her plans to keep both husbands separate but equal in life turned into shit. She felt a mixture of emotions, sadness for Andy, annoyance that Bill, her first love, had already flown to New Zealand to begin his 4-year business trip, and she could only console her daughters that they had lost 2 fathers in their lives. Besides, she was angry about her mother's attitude to the whole situation. Yes, she understood that Claire had never fully agreed with the idea of separate but equal husbands, but now she was becoming simply unbearable in her statements. Whenever Katie talked about how bad she was, Claire would respond, "Really? Then imagine how bad Andy is now. And it's not his fault, is it?" Katie sent Andy a long text message in which, in fact, she begged him to give her another chance. She claimed that the presence of Bill Baxter in her life as a second husband did not cause Andy any harm, and hoped that Andy would agree to marriage counseling to help them get back together. Andy followed Mary Northern's advice and signed up for an individual consultation with one of the psychologists on her contact list. He shared this message with his consultant, Pete Waters, who whistled and said, "Damn it, isn't she a narcissist or something?" Andy said, "Do you really think she's narcissistic?" Pete shrugged and answered, "Oh, I was kind of joking when I called her a narcissist. It's impossible to make a diagnosis from such a short letter, but to be honest, I do see some narcissistic traits in her. To think that for most of the entire marriage she is able to control 2 husbands, and then express shock, surprise, and even some resentment when her legitimate husband decides to leave the marriage is not a normal reaction on her part. It's a little weird, to be honest. After all, she had to be exposed. Please tell us how it really was." Andy told me how he found out about the betrayal and how long it had been going on. For a month, he held bi-weekly sessions with Pete, and in the foreseeable future, he reduced them to weekly ones. Meanwhile, Mary filed for divorce from Katie and also began legal proceedings regarding the constructive termination of the contract with Marvin Monk and his GWS Corporation, which eventually brought Andy compensation in the amount of $5 million. Andy moved from a hotel room to an apartment a few streets away. Having decided to engage in business consulting, he turned to the internet and ordered on the website quill.com office furniture and a new desktop computer. He never dreamed that he would get a lot of work. But to my surprise, I quickly found several clients. Or they found him through word of mouth and LinkedIn. He received a letter from the GWS legal department threatening to fire him. In response, he demanded that they contact not him, but his lawyer, Mary Northern of Cascade, Northern and Wyort. To his surprise, neither he nor Mary received any further news about their letter of termination. "They just merged," Mary said, grinning. In early January, Katie received the divorce papers, and to Andy's surprise, neither Katie nor the girls tried to contact him. But Mary noted that most likely this was done on the advice of her lawyers. In March, the case was heard by Judge Jennifer Harris, a rather thin, middle-aged woman who somewhat resembled Judge Judy. To be honest, she played along with it sometimes. She liked to look at people in court through stylish, half-open-rimmed glasses. Speaking to her secretary, she shook her head. "This case is a real mess. Is it worse than the usual cases that we observe?" "Oh my God, yes. Much worse. A wife has been cheating on her husband with her ex-husband for 15 years, and her stepdaughter's grandparents know about her infidelities." The secretary let out a low whistle. "Damn it! And does the wife justify it?" "Yes, which should be fun. Or not." Andy's testimony was impressive and depressing. He wrote that he had always wanted to be a father and thought that he had achieved fatherhood with Cassandra and Emily, but found out that this was not really the case. Now he knows the reason why his ex-wife and her twins wouldn't let him adopt them. Now he is at such an age that he will most likely not be able to have children of his own, and this is another thing that his cheating wife stole from him. At 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning, the case was opened. "Your Honor, my name is Mary Northern, and I represent my client, Mr. Andrew Masters, in the divorce case against his wife, Katie Masters. As a basis, we cite Katie Masters' long and egregious affair with her ex-husband, William Baxter. We have evidence that Mrs. Masters cheated on her husband for 15 years. I'd like to call the first witness, Douglas Jenner." Doug was sworn in. "My name is Doug Jenner. I am the director of Jenner Investments. I was hired by Mr. Andrew Masters to investigate his wife's possible infidelity." "What have you found out, Mr. Jenner?" "I have discovered that Mrs. Masters has been having an affair for the past 15 years, cheating on her husband with her first husband. My detectives found out that Mrs. Masters' employer and father-in-law, Marvin Monk, helped his daughter in her relationship with her ex-husband by organizing fictitious business trips to give her freedom of action. The evidence we have collected is now part of the divorce affidavit. Thank you, Mr. Jenner." Katie's lawyer, Paul Foster, stood up. He looked slick, and Andy noticed a look of distaste on the judge's face. He suppressed a smile and thought, "This can't be good for Katie." "Your Honor," he said in an authoritative tone, "I demand that these so-called evidence be rejected by the court, since they are all private information, obviously illegally obtained by a spy." Judge Harris fixed him with a piercing stare. "Do you have any evidence to back up your claims, Mr. Foster?" "As such, there are none. But how else could he have obtained this alleged evidence?" "Objection, Your Honor," Mary said. "Either Mr. Foster thinks the evidence is false, which is what he's hinting at, or he thinks it's all true but obtained illegally. Both of his opinions on this issue can't be true at the same time, can they?" "I agree, Miss Northern. Mr. Jenner, how did you get this information?" Your Honor, my staff and I used exclusively publicly available sources, accounts on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and other social networks and platforms, as well as public sections of the website of Mr. Master's employer, GWS. In addition, we discovered a publicly available blog by William Billy Baxter, which contains information about the current relationship not only with Mrs. Masters, but also with her twin daughters, as well as with his former father-in-law and mother-in-law. We also examined publicly available online calendars. The judge said, "Why didn't you use any listening devices, Mr. Jenner?" Shrugging his shoulders, he said, "Well, apart from the legality of this idea, I think it was not necessary. The reason is that, like many people involved in cheating or cheating in business, they are not the sharpest knives in the knife drawer and seem to be practically forced to share their illegal actions." Foster asked sarcastically, "If that's true, then why didn't her husband know about it?" "He just didn't look, not really expecting that he should look. I've seen this before in similar situations." Foster's an idiot, Andy realized. Acting in this way, trying to challenge the evidence gathered by Doug Jenner and his team, he noticeably admitted to himself that yes, Katie is a cheater. And then he made a claim to Andy for not knowing that she was a cheater. What an idiot Foster is. Judge Harris allowed Doug to sit down. Then she turned to Foster. "Mr. Foster, do you have any evidence to refute the evidence presented by Mr. Masters' team?" Foster seemed to be stumped by this question. "Not as such, Your Honor. All I can say on behalf of Mrs. Masters is that she loves her husband and wants him to withdraw his divorce suit." "Then why doesn't Mrs. Masters do it herself? Katie came forward in court and it looked pathetic. She really loves Andy. She regrets this family cruise, but it's basically a misunderstanding." Andy snorted at this. "And the only thing she's done wrong is she fell in love with two men, Billy and Andy, and wants to keep them in her life. Two husbands, separate but equal." Foster let Katie speak. Privately, he considered her an idiot, but he was paid a considerable sum to represent the interests of this stupid bitch, so he will do it to the best of his ability. Eventually, Mary stood up and looked at Katie. "Well, Mrs. Masters, the thought of having two husbands in your life must have made you very happy. A real incentive for your own self-esteem, but not very good for your legitimate husband. You, your daughters, and your parents turned Andy into a cuckold, didn't you?" "I don't like the word cuckold," Katie replied with a slight whimper in her voice. "Besides, if we consider this word in this context, then Billy is also a cuckold." Mary shook her head. "No, a cuckold is a man who is being cheated on by his wife. Bill knew about Andy, didn't he?" Katie nodded. "Yes, I knew. But what's the difference? Andy became a cuckold because of your fault. But Bill, because he knew, is not a cuckold. He is a cuckold. A cuckold is a man who knows about his wife's infidelity and indulges her. And Bill and Andy have never been separate and equal in your life, have they?" "There were. They will still be there if Andy refuses this divorce process. The reason why there was no equality and justice in your relationship with Andy and Billy is that Billy knew everything about Andy. But Andy didn't know anything at all about Billy's role in your life, did he?" "No, but only because I knew that Andy would never agree to Bill's presence in my life. He wouldn't understand." She began to wipe her eyes with the napkin she was clutching in her hand. Mary sucked in a breath before speaking again. "So you knew that he would demand a divorce if he found out about your affair. Is it almost the same as if you thought he should have demanded a divorce, given the circumstances?" "But I love him. Girls love him." She broke down, and the judge took the opportunity to take a break for lunch. After lunch, Foster asked Katie a question. "What is the ideal outcome for you, Mrs. Masters? So that Andy forgives me, gets over the pain that I caused him by accident, and starts counseling both as a couple and individually. Maybe family therapy?" "Your Honor," Foster said, now addressing the judge, "we suggest that Mr. Masters drop the divorce suit and undergo therapy to help him adjust to the reality of his marriage, when his wife loves both him and Mr. Baxter." "Is that what you want, Mrs. Masters?" the judge asked. There was a lot of doubt in her voice. "Yes, Your Honor. I would like Andy to undergo therapy, perhaps hypnotherapy, to help him come to terms with the fact that he is my husband and Billy is my second husband, by a court decision." The judge sounded incredulous. "So you want the court to force your husband to undergo hypnotherapy in order to turn him into your willing and obedient puppet?" Foster realized in which direction the judge was moving and intervened. "I wouldn't talk about it in those terms, Your Honor." She gave him a somewhat grim smile. "Well, that's great for you, Mr. Foster. But here is my court, My conditions. If you two geniuses think that I'm going to force Mr. Masters to undergo behavioral modification therapy to turn him into an obedient puppet, then you should rethink this terrible idea. I will not tolerate this, and I doubt that any certified or licensed psychotherapist would even agree to such a vile offer. She shook her head. I reject the petition. Katie said, but Your Honor, therapy will actually help Andy come to terms with his role in my life. Since Billy will be away for 4 years, I thought that this time would be more than enough for Andy to understand that everything will be fine, to come to terms with the situation. No, the judge said firmly. It won't work. I'm getting closer to making my decision. Mrs. Northern, I see that there is a prenuptial agreement, according to which the house belonging to the company remains with Mrs. Masters, and Mrs. Masters, by virtue of the infidelity clause, retains only 15% of the marital property. That's right, Your Honor, Foster interjected. But, Your Honor, I would like to point out that the infidelity clause applies only to Mr. Masters and not to Mrs. Masters. Therefore, without consultation, and if the divorce goes as it looks, the infidelity clause in the marriage contract is invalid, and we demand 80% of the assets, including the $10 million that Mr. Masters earned by selling his shares in the company. The judge had stopped being just annoyed and was now furious. This is nonsense, Mr. Foster. The infidelity clause applies to both husband and wife. I've rarely heard such self-serving nonsense in my court. Mrs. Masters cheated on her husband for a long time. In fact, poisoned the consciousness of his stepdaughters, setting them against him, while getting the best of both worlds, while her husband received bad treatment. I've heard enough of this narcissistic nonsense from Mrs. Masters. My decision is that the divorce has been granted and the prenuptial agreement is still fully in force, and she won't get any of the proceeds from the sale of the shares. Absolutely nothing. There was a loud banging of a hammer, and it was all over. They were divorced. Later that day, Mary and Andy enjoyed a hamburger at a coffee shop restaurant located near the courthouse. What's next, Andy? Mary asked. I found that I like the work of a consultant, so I will develop it. I think I might consider moving to Florida. If you don't mind me asking, what are you going to do with the girls? Will you look for a relationship with them in the future? He shrugged his shoulders. I don't see how I can do this. They both knew their mother was cheating on me and they didn't care. Moreover, they encouraged her and lied to me. So I really don't see the point in worrying. I see what you're getting at, Andy. They continued to chat about common topics until they left the restaurant and went about their business. A few days later, Katie asked for a meeting with Andy. He agreed, but demanded that they meet at his lawyer's office. They were sitting in a medium-sized conference room opposite each other at a table made of polished wood. Well, Katie, you wanted a meeting. What do you want to say? I'm sorry, Andy. I guess I've become greedy and stupid. I actually thought I could keep you and Billy as separate but equal husbands. Obviously, this is unacceptable to you, and I'm really sorry. He nodded but said nothing. She continued. I'd also like to know what we're going to do about your relationship with the twins. They miss you, you know. He looked puzzled. Why would they miss me? Isn't there already a real father in their lives? I understand that you are angry with me, my parents, and the girls, but the girls are still little, and all they knew was that there were 2 dads, okay? So please don't blame them. They lied to me. Did you know that Billy would take my place on that December cruise, and yet joined you to trick me at the dinner table that night by pretending to be upset that their grandfather excluded me from the cruise? Katie looked upset. Yes, I know, I see what you're getting at. We just didn't want you to get hurt by being excluded from the cruise and replaced by Billy. But I think you were hurt anyway. More than you'll ever understand, Katie. You, all of you, have destroyed me. Are you going to meet the girls? What is it? She asked. What happened to Billy, their real father? Where is he? I've already gone to Antarctica to take pictures and paint. He will be away from home for 4 years. It's a big deal for him. It's a pretty prestigious job. So you got rid of me, your cuckold husband, and the man you replaced me with left you for at least 4 years. It sucks being you and your daughters, Katie. So to answer your question, I'm not going to date your daughters. It's too early for me, Katie. Maybe someday I'll contact Cassandra and Emily, but don't hold your breath. That was the end of their meeting. That day, when Andy was sorting books in the library, which he laughingly called his library corner, he was slightly shocked by a phone call from Claire, his former mother-in-law. Hello, Claire. How can I help you? Hi, Andy. Please accept my apologies for what was done to you. He waited for her to continue talking. I warned Katie and Marvin that the idea of having you and Baxter as separate but equal husbands would not work, because it is completely wrong and stupid, and it's completely unfair to you. You've done nothing to deserve this kind of treatment. I told the girls not to listen to the nonsense that Katie and Marvin were feeding them, but they were too young and delighted with secrecy and having two fathers. Katie told me that you don't plan to see the girls? As their grandmother, I am saddened by this, but as your mother-in-law, I sympathize with you and fully understand your position. Thank you, Claire. What you're saying is very helpful. I'm glad you said that. What else do you have? Well, I'm breaking up with Marvin. How? Why? Because I really don't want to continue living with a man who can pull off a trick like this vacation trip nonsense. I know he did it because he loves Katie and she fooled him. But even so, letting a creepy shit like Bill Baxter take your place on a family cruise was completely shitty of him. And I realized that I really didn't want to live with Marvin because at least in the short term. And after that, I really don't know. If you thought the idea of separate but equal husbands was wrong, why didn't you do something about it? Because I saw how happy you were and hoped that Katie would stop being such an idiot. But she never stopped. I guess I was trying to calm my conscience by making sure you get compensated for the shit that Katie, Marvin, the girls, and I probably put on you too. For example, I made Marvin give you those shares, you know? She laughed. Andy giggled too. Thanks for that, at least, Claire. It's nice to know that at least one family member has my back at least to some extent. What are you going to do now? I do business consulting and I like it. Will you stay in the city? I'm thinking about moving. I really have nothing to stay here for. I'm going to miss you, Andy. Yes, me too, Claire. I'm going to miss you. They ended the conversation. In fact, he was sorting books in preparation for moving to Florida. He contacted Julia, who promised to help him meet with real estate agents in Florida. She also sent him a photo of her younger sister, informing him that she had recently divorced. She too, Andy realized, on a scale from 1 to 10, easily pulls in 15. Maybe this life in divorce won't be as hard as I thought. Grinning, he said to his reflection. He visited Florida, met with Julia and a real estate agent her daughter knew, and bought a nice house a few miles from Julia. I also had lunch with Julia and her sister, and he made arrangements with Sonia, his sister, to start dating when he moved to Florida. Both suffered from cheating spouses, so both did not plan to rush. Andy was intrigued by the fact that she had already started talking about the possibility of having children with him, and in a few years of a happy, normal marriage, they had 2 children, and life in general, and married life in particular, was extremely good. As for his former marriage, his former family, as he told Sonia and Julia at dinner one evening when they put the children to bed, you can't drive along the highway of life looking over your shoulder, otherwise you'll crash. My former family is in the distant past, and you and our children, Sonia, are my present and future. He was glad that Claire had divorced Marvin. Obviously, he was not just carried away by replacing Julia, but got into a compromising situation with Katie and the twins. Andy laughed when she posted on Facebook that they didn't have a prenuptial agreement, so the divorce cost him a lot. He chuckled when Claire told him that she had found a young tennis professional who would help her improve her service, or something like that.